Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, February 24th, 2022. Time for another war, I guess, as well as another show. War in Europe this morning. How you doing? Well, Russia invaded Ukraine again yesterday. They continued their invasion of Ukraine, I guess is the proper way to say it. Crimea is Ukraine. They've been invading there for going on 8 years now, so I guess we could say we're used to it. Now open hostilities, things blowing up all over the place. Missile attacks, yada yada. We'll have to yada yada. We're yada yadaing missile attacks in Europe, but that's the way it goes with Russian invasions. Okay, plenty to round up on that front. Of course, President Biden actually playing president here, and the former guy running around playing, I don't know what, saboteur, I suppose. He and Tucker Carlson and all of the other conservative figures deciding to take the opposite tack. And we'll just say whatever the opposite of the United States president says with regard to what's going on there, and just see if it has any impact. I don't know if it's going to be good or bad. We'll find out. Plenty to retrieve from pocket, even without the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That was always going to be the case. So lots to round up there. Got plenty of problems of our own. That probably part of the design, of course. The more distracted and disunited the rest of the world is, the less they can give problems to Russia as they roll through Ukraine. So, well, we'll try and unpack a lot of that. Greg Dworkin will be with us, as he is through every war so far in Europe, anyway, that we've been aware of, and maybe that just could be his thing. Lots to catch up on from all over the place. His roundup, now a stack of 25 notes. This is a fairly heavy day. Not the most I've ever seen, but a good healthy portion in the raft of stories. You know, some of them are stories, some of them are notes on the stories, some of them are quotes from the stories to make things easier. So we'll sort all of that out. Man, I don't know. Let's see. I don't even know what really I would say has been occupying most of Twitter besides the Ukraine thing. I will caution everybody to be careful in the era of manipulation of social media. It's going to be difficult to know whether what we're seeing is real or not, and you'll have to verify your sources, or at least take everything with a grain of salt, and be aware that I guess we could be misled by either side. There's a stronger than usual incentive for disinformation or propaganda, which is kind of somewhat different, I guess you could say. And it'll be difficult to tell exactly what's going on. I guess in this case, you might find that it might be in the interest of the Ukrainians to exaggerate the attacks, but it's hard to exaggerate a full-on invasion. You never know. But I'm just saying, think back to Kuwait and incubators being stolen with babies chucked on the floor by the invading Iraqi troops. Yes, no, maybe, I don't know. Some of that happened before some of you were born, I guess. So we'll be trying to take everything, or look at everything with a somewhat jaundiced eye, but there's no doubt that there is a lot of good and verifiable information out there, and at least once we'll all probably fall prey to something, whether it's the repurposing of an old photo or old video that generally does show kind of sort of what it's like there, maybe, or it could be just entirely false, and you got to be aware of that. All right, well, let's see. On a lighter note, Bill says there's no war going on at least in Portland, Maine. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now, and there's no attack on that will disrupt that, as far as I'm aware. Whoops, here comes Greg. So, Kagro in the Morning radio show live. Whoops, I lost my place here. And it looks like Kagro X picked the wrong week to stop smoking, drinking, popping amphetamines, says you, and sniffing glue. Now, all still available. We can always just take a 180, or we could phase it back in gently so that we're conscious and aware and can keep an eye on Ukraine. And honestly, I don't want to take it all away from them. They may need some smoking, drinking, amphetamines, and glue sniffing. before the week is done. The week has been flying by up until now. Let's see if a war drags us down. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay.
I don't live in Ukraine.
Yeah, well, it's a good time to not live there, or so long as you can actually live somewhere else.
Well, Americans were warned to get out, so hopefully they did, except for,
Almost
CNN
never.
and the other people who rushed toward those things.
Right.
And you're quite
The weather
right
reporters.
about, pointing out the issues with fake video. Actually, the first item I had was from Jeremy Littau, who is
What a liar.
a journalism professor, Lehigh.
Guy's out of his mind. Yeah.
He says, among other things, slow down, apply skepticism to content, don't amplify propaganda. Ask whether the source is credible, whether they shot footage with their own equipment. Even cable news will repurpose feeds on live coverage, which opens them to synthetic content operations if not careful. We haven't seen a war or political campaign awash in synthetic content, but it's coming. Luke in Boba Fett was fun, but the same tech used for that could generate fake audio and video. To justify invasions and human rights violations, tech is widespread, easier than ever, and quite good. He adds, I teach a lot about propaganda, conspiracy theories, and deepfake content in a world full of upheaval these days, and then wonder why I'm not sleeping well.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of deep fakes out there. Not sure Lehigh is really a university, but, it's possible.
Are you trying to spread fake propaganda?
I'm just, that's, everything could be deep. Have you been there? I don't know.
Me personally?
Yeah, like you don't know it's real.
No, I haven't.
Okay. Well, I haven't. It is, but never mind that. I
haven't been to China, but I'm told it's real.
I think it's fake, like the moon landing.
Supposedly from the moon you could see the Great Wall. You think that's fake too?
Of course it is. You can't see that wall from the moon. That's nuts. The moon isn't even there. No wonder you can see the wall. It's still on Earth.
So I'm going to quote today from some pretty good journalists. I'm just trying to keep two people who I know and trust.
Fake.
And you can still make mistakes doing that. We all make mistakes, but we'll try to be careful about
There'll be
it.
a lot
But
made.
I think some of the important themes that people have been talking about are well represented here.
Well, good.
For example, I'm going to start with Garrett Graff,
fake guy,
who parenthetically has a new fake book out, 800 pages worth of revisiting Watergate.
Wow, fake.
Sitting on my table. It's a great paperweight. I haven't started to read it yet because I'm still trying to get through The Bright Ages, which is a revisit of medieval history and a lot of fun.
Really?
Very good book.
All
but
right.
I am anxiously waiting to get to Watergate because that's a topic I lived through and was quite interested in at the time and still am.
Yeah.
In any case, Garrett Graff says, one thing worth keeping in my mind today, there's a straight line from Russia's attack on the U.S. election in 2016 to January 6th to today's new invasion of Ukraine. The chaos that Russia unleashed with the election of Trump weakened us to the point Putin feels confident invading Europe. I wrote in 2017 that Russia's election attack was probably the most successful intelligence operation in history, and today's developments bear out just how much it changed the world stage and how much space it gave Putin to operate.
Yeah, well, that's a good observation. I mean, if it's all true, then it's great.
Well, that's the thing.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
People,
it's hard to believe.
Still make fun of Hillary Clinton for pointing out that Trump was a Russian tool. In fact, Trump was a Russian tool.
Yeah.
And people who say, Barr and Mueller proved that there was nothing to the Russian stuff, and look at them, they're all missing the point. The Russians hacked the DNC just as in Watergate, the plumbers hacked the DNC. And Graff's book, which I haven't read yet, but reviews say is really, he says, I saw him interviewed and talk about his own book. Could have been a deep fake, but I think it was actually him. I wasn't there in the room, so I can't, attest to it. But he basically says, what we thought we knew, there really hasn't been a review of Watergate in the 10 years that we learned a whole bunch of other stuff. And so I'm trying to put together because it was all part of a much bigger program that, people don't really appreciate. So I think that the idea that Trump was aided and abetted by the Russians is in fact true. And it was a much bigger deal. Screw you, New York Times, for your email stories.
All right. I mean, that's a valid point of view. I I see what he's talking about there being a straight line. Certainly, that would be something they'd be interested in. The idea of just making it impossible, if nothing else, even if you can't convince all Americans that these things happened, you can sow enough confusion so that when you do something like, okay, I just invaded Ukraine. Oh, yeah, who says? Right? And all of a sudden, the world doesn't know what to do because they can't make up their mind about what's true or not. You say they invaded Ukraine, but you said the other day that they did this and they didn't do that.
Well, this will clarify, I
masks,
think, the idea that Trump is losing power in the GOP, yes or no, and the GOP is split over post-Trump, yes or no, and the GOP is split on how to react to Russia invading Ukraine, yes or no. I mean, what's clear is that the loudest voices and the quickest voices to get on the air don't have any coherent thing to say about any of that. Other than it's Biden's fault.
Okay.
That's the only thing they have in common. They have
easy to
Tim
get on
Scott
the air that
saying,
way.
this is terrible, we stand with Ukraine, and Marco Rubio saying this is terrible, we stand with Ukraine, and those same guys like 15 minutes earlier and of course we're all Donald Trump supporters because he's great, and he thinks Putin's a genius. So, what are you saying? Oh, we're saying it's Biden's fault. We don't have to say anything else.
Yeah, it'll get them on the air. It did. Yeah, I mean, I've never been the hugest fan of, everybody has to unite behind the president in times of crisis like this, but...
Well, you'll see that this does not happen. But,
don't worry
what will happen is a portion of the Republicans will do that. The Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell
Some of them,
wing of the party will. And many of them won't. And so it'll be exposed as being split. And yet, the question is, what difference does that make? Because in the end, it only matters for elections.
Yeah. Right, and there will be newspapers that cover it that way. They'll have correspondents in there getting shelled and trying to avoid Russian missiles, and at the same time they'll be saying, but, how will it play in our elections? Are they really positioning themselves?
Because Chuck Todd will come up with that, I guarantee you.
True.
This is awful, this is terrible, all of this stuff happened, and it just might work because people like me will have Steve Bannon on to talk about why it was a good idea for this. Kara Swisher, coming at this from a different angle. Steve Bannon and Eric Prince say we should be supporting Russia because Putin is anti-woke and has no tolerance for LGBTQ. This was on the War Room, Steve Bannon's podcast.
I see.
Okay. And Kara Swisher, the loud part out loud, they like Putin since they want to be him one day. Again, the attacks on one single swimmer are the rage narrative to launch much more potent ones, and not just LGBTQ, but all those not them. Anybody carrying this toxic water is both stupid and should be ashamed. And again, I look to the Sunday shows who have supporters who think like this but aren't them on. And of course, Fox News, which is hardly showing anything about the Russian invasion. Like they always say, Kara Swisher says they should move there if they like it so much. And having lived through this dangerous anti-gay nonsense before, just because these kind of obviously sexually insecure cretins do not succeed doesn't mean they ever give up. So that's something to keep in mind. Let's be clear, this is very dangerous rhetoric, even if most decry it, like Omicron. It spreads across the mentally unvaccinated and brings them right back to their base rage. See Texas trying to make supporting trans rights child abuse. I mean, this is not, crazy stuff she's saying. It's crazy stuff they're doing.
Yeah, right. She's not making it up. They're big day for Texas to get very Putin-like yesterday.
Yeah. So, we got issues here in this country. And so, as long as people vote for folks like Abbott, that's what you get. And as long as people decide, well, but I don't like this other issue, and they weren't, they weren't strong enough on student loans, so the hell with democracy. I have little patience for that, frankly.
Okay. Sure. No, I think that's
it's an issue. I get it. Some things are bigger issues.
Yes. I know, and then that will maybe be the biggest one in their lives, but okay. Compete in the marketplace. It's okay to say
right. Get your people elected so you have some influence on it so you can yell at them. You want to sit it out, you're going to get Steve Bannon. That's your choice. You don't like it, I don't care. That's your choice.
Okay. Steve Bannon will forgive your debts, probably.
He loves it. That's how he wants you to think.
Okay. Whew. Okay.
Now, why the internet people like GoDaddy don't pull Bannon's URL and let him publish his garbage propaganda. I don't know, but there it is.
Yeah. Well, that brings me to, you were saying Fox News is not covering the invasion.
They're not
very
covering
much.
it the way CNN is. That's for sure.
Well, that's probably. I mean, I guess that's to be expected. I did see somebody saying yesterday, though they themselves had left Facebook a while ago, their significant other had maintained an account, and not an apolitical person, but not a word about the invasion in her news feed. I thought that was interesting. And, the throwaway line was a nice algorithm you got there, Mark. But, I mean, don't Russian oligarchs actually own a significant chunk of Facebook? I wonder if that has more to do with it than the algorithm. But together, they're keeping a lot of people in the dark about it, and they're still blank slates on this invasion, and I guess it's still possible to convince them that it's an awesome thing.
Right. I am not going to cover the military aspect of what's going on here, other than to say it looks like, from what's going on, that this is a full-scale invasion of the entire country trying to overthrow the government, rather than let's just annex the
supposedly breakaway
the two independent, that's in scare quotes, republics. So there's some weird stuff in terms of propaganda. For example, this is obviously meant for a Russian audience, but Putin getting on Russian TV yesterday and saying that, they had to invade Ukraine because they have to denazify the country.
Oh, yes. With
Zelensky, a Jewish president, saying, what are you talking about?
Right. That's a thing you can do there in Russia and say, they're full of Nazis. We got to get rid of Ukraine. Not covered in glory in their total history with the actual Nazis, of course, but the
Russians are simply calculating that everybody hates us except when we're fighting Nazis. So let's fight some Nazis.
That's what we'll say we're doing. Yeah. So plenty of propaganda. Plenty of strikes all over the country. It's not just these supposedly these two areas yearning to be part of Russia. Lots of people are yearning for that, I guess. But yeah, plenty of, strategic strikes hitting Kyiv and other major cities. Troops rolling in from all directions, including coming across the Belarus border as well. But it's Russian troops, not Belarus troops.
Well, Kaja Kallas, who's Prime Minister of Estonia, says Russia must stop immediately. The people of Ukraine, you have our unwavering support. This is Foreign Minister in Lithuania. We in Lithuania know it very well that Ukraine is fighting not just for Ukraine, but for us in the region, Europe, and everyone else in the democratic world. It is our obligation not just to punish Russia for its actions, but to help Ukraine with all and every means available now. So if you're trying to push the I'd prefer to be neutral Baltic states into NATO, good job. Seems to be succeeding. NATO is activating its defense plans for Eastern Europe, just announced by the Secretary General of NATO, whatever that means. They're trying to fight against blitzkrieg attacks that they didn't see coming. The word blitzkrieg used purposefully there.
Yeah, well, they planned for it, then they did see it coming, but all right.
And some really fascinating stuff developing otherwise. UK PM just a few minutes ago, today in concert with our allies, we will agree a massive package of economic sanctions designed in time to hobble the Russian economy, and to that end we must also collectively cease the dependence on Russian oil and gas for too long, which has given Putin his grip on Western politics. So basically the PM in the UK saying, tighten your belts, energy prices are going to rise, but this is tough medicine that you have to take.
Then he had a party.
He probably said that while he had a funny hat on and was drinking champagne, him being Boris Johnson.
It was actually his hair.
But there's that. And then there's these fascinating process moves, if you will, at the United Nations that I just thought I would cover. Everybody else is doing the shelling. I just thought I would cover this because I just think this is fascinating here.
I think I know what you're talking about.
Right. So Hayes Brown last night was looking at the response of the Ukrainians at the Security Council.
He was.
And he said something interesting could be developing at the UN. Ukraine appears to be laying the groundwork to challenge whether the Russian Federation is a legitimate successor to the USSR's seat and veto on the Security Council.
Yeah.
Here's the ambassador citing the part of the charter that deals with admission of members during his speech at the UN Security Council earlier tonight, which, among other things, says that the USSR has a charter seat at the Security Council. It doesn't say anything about Russia.
Right.
And here's his demand for the documents that show that the Russian Federation was welcomed to the body by the United Nations Security Council and General Assembly. These documents don't exist because the UN Legal Council made the call. So this is along the lines of your, okay, well, you have to bring the document physically and show it to me because otherwise, how do we know it really exists? Right? The UN Charter was never amended after the USSR broke up. It still references the Soviet Union as one of the permanent members. Article 23, Security Council shall consist of 15 members of the UN, Republic of China, France, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, UK, and Northern Ireland. The US shall be permanent members, and then 10 other members to be non-permanent members. In the first instance, to the contribution of members of the UN to the maintenance of international peace and security and other purposes of the organization, and also to equitable geographical distribution. So the people who get a seat at the table, interestingly, is the Republic of China. Mm-hmm. The Republic of China.
Yes, right.
Okay. And for 10 years, those of you who are old enough may remember, the U.S. and China battled over who gets the China seat. Because Taiwan was sitting there for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And then the General Assembly decided, no, it really should be the current government in China, which is not the Republic of China.
Yeah. A significant portion of the initial history of the UN, they were like, yeah, that's not China. That's China.
So that's the only example of a member joining outside the usual method.
You know.
When the People's Republic of China took over the Republic of China seat. And they did it via a resolution from the General Assembly, which the U.S. wasn't happy about at the time. So is that Ukraine's political goal here? Yeah, I understand that war, takes precedence over what you decide is a resolution at the UN. Well, but the point is there's lots of pushback from the rest of the world in all sorts of different ways. And that's why Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Moldova, people you don't necessarily expect are not so keen with what's going on there. China, again, is staying relatively neutral in this. We don't know how Turkey is going to respond, but Russia may well have isolated itself from the rest of the world. And that will have an effect eventually, even though it's not going to stop the shooting right now, as Boris Johnson is alluding to. This stuff's going to take time. Yeah. So Hayes Brown says, so is that maybe Ukraine's goal to have the UN General Assembly pass a resolution declaring either the USSR seat is empty or that some other state should be the real successor? And would it work? Hell if I know. But it's fascinating, he writes, and would be wild to see how it develops. And again, makes reference to the fact that the U.S. fought China over this for 10 years.
Yeah. So there's some precedent for it.
So it's diplomatic hardball, And so what does diplomatic hardball mean when tanks are rolling through? Nothing now, but, may have some effects later.
It couldn't hurt, and in the effort to isolate Russia in the eyes of the world, having them stripped of their permanent seat on the UN Security Council would have an impact. It's a great idea. I don't know whether
it's not just the Security Council. Kelly O'Donnell tweets another thing, which I think is Article 6 from their organizing document, whatever it's called. A member of the UN who has persistently violated the principles contained in the present charter may be expelled from the organization by the General Assembly on the recommendation of the Security Council.
Okay.
Now remember, Russia is chairing the Security Council right now.
Yes.
And the permanent members have a veto. So the point is, if you can bring up a reason for why they shouldn't be on the Security Council, you get rid of their veto, you can throw them out of the UN.
Yeah. It's a thing that can happen. I don't know whether it's a good idea or a bad
idea. Whether it has any permanent effects or not. But isolating them, is
if that's what
takes away a propaganda piece for them. That they operate on that.
Yeah. Well, it's a great idea. It's good thinking. I think. By the way, Bill had a great idea. He said, as long as we're just declaring whatever you want, like if you're going to denazify Ukraine could just declare, you know what, we're annexing you.
You're going to denazify Zelensky specifically.
Yeah. Oh, well, you know how that goes. That's a rough treatment. But they should just put the shoe on the other foot, like the old joke. In Russia, in Ukraine annexes you. You're part of us. How about that?
Yeah.
we're going to do it in reverse. Well, that's crazy. But yeah, now we're just saying, I can't tell. It's competing claims. Who knows? But it's a great legal move. And there's really no reason legally, as far as I can tell, they're right. Show me the documents. You always want to see the paperwork. Let me read it. What does it say? And I guess everybody just assumed that the Russian Federation should be the successor because, I don't know, they both had their capitals in Moscow. That's
Right.
not a really great reason.
In Germany, we denazify Germany, but in Russia, they denazify you.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, I think, I'm not even certain exactly what we're saying. None of it makes any sense.
What is that about? Putin's spokesman today, again, Kelly O'Donnell, Putin's spokesman today with the stunning and abhorrent claim, ideally it is necessary to liberate Ukraine to clear it of the Nazis. Our operation has its own goals, and they must be achieved.
Okay, well, like you said, people like to hate on Nazis, and good reason, but they have to actually be there in order for this to work.
Right. And so, I didn't have a tremendous amount ready beyond this, but I'll just give you some interesting feedback here. Reminder,
Yes.
Tuckio Rose.
Good.
Tucker Carlson. Tuckio Rose is the phrase used in this tweet. Tuckio Rose, Tucker Carlson, Trump, Mike Pompeo own this. They have blood in their hands. They evaded the most dangerous enemy in the United States. History will not treat them kindly. Author of the tweet, Alexander S. Vindeman,
Oh.
who, by the way, is suing Donald Trump Jr. as of today. Papers were
right.
served because of witness intimidation.
All right, yeah, so good. A little trouble for Donald Trump Jr. It's been a while since he's been in trouble, except from his dad. So
More from Vindeman after the break, because he's
Okay.
got an article in Atlantic about what we could have done different.
yeah, is he Ukrainian? I can't remember, but we'll look it up. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here in Ukraine, here in Netroots Radio, of course. But we're all spiritually with Ukraine on this one today. Yeah, all right. Well, anyway, I'm fascinated by what you brought up about what happened at the UN. That is a great procedural move, and I don't know if it goes anywhere, but it's a good question to ask, and it's actually not only a great time to ask it just geopolitically for them, but it's always a good time to wonder, I always think, about what is Russia exactly anyway, because I keep beating on the same drum of they're not really. You really shouldn't necessarily just regard them as a regular country with a regular government and everything.
No, they're a gas station with a really aggressive CEO.
Basically, right. So that comparison was made yesterday. We've heard or we've discussed it on the show before that it's sort of like a mob government, and they have the trappings of government. They inherited all this stuff. And we continue to treat them that way. And a lot of the times we treat Saudi Arabia the same way.
Well,
both
Saudi Arabia
organizations
doesn't have nuclear weapons.
No, they don't. And that's a big...
Russia has both.
Right. That a way in favor of doing what they're asking, even if you don't agree with it. But, yeah, you can question... Yeah, I don't know. Because we grew up in the West and there's this whole Western construct, and the UN is based on it, it's kind of like, well, if they have one of these chairs with a nameplate, then they're a country. And it doesn't matter how they really run themselves. Externally, we will view them as a country, and their chief whatever that, their main representative as their president and the legitimate voice of the country, and they might just have murdered their way to it. But for most of human history, that's how legitimate countries actually chose their legitimate leaders anyway. So what's the difference? Except we don't do that anymore.
Alexander Vindman did have
Yes,
long article
Alexander
in the
Vindman.
Atlantic, which I'm not really going to cover all that much because I just don't feel like
I
it.
won't let you talk. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. I don't feel like spending today, the day of the attack on Ukraine, talking about everything that we did wrong. But he does point out that when Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons,
Yes.
again, one of Putin's nonsense propaganda things is we have to go there to make sure that they don't, get nuclear weapons. Well, they actually gave up their nuclear weapons, and Russia signed on to it. But at that time, we could have opened up the purse strings and just supported them a whole lot more than we did. And we didn't because we wanted to make nice to Russia because we wanted to see if we could, pull them into the League of Civilized Nations and somehow make them not who they are. And again, we're not talking about the Russian people. We're talking about the Russian government. And that didn't work.
It is.
It was a failure.
Yeah. Right. They were promised protection in exchange for those giving up those weapons, and it doesn't seem like they're going to get it. But I think they might have suspected all along that they weren't. But what happened to did Russia inherit those weapons? Did we destroy them? I
think we destroyed them. I think we got rid of them, and I don't think Russia inherited them.
Well, that's good.
Russia's got a pretty large stockpile. They don't need like 15 others.
No.
This is from The Economist, behind a paywall, unfortunately. But Putin's energy weapon, how will Europe cope if Russia cuts off its gas? I think it's an important piece. I'm more interested in covering that today. Better than you might think. Every 4 years, the European Network of Transmission System Operators for Gas, the ENTSOG, there's one for you, is required to carry out simulation of disaster scenarios. In the most recent such exercise last year, they considered 20 shades of disaster and concluded European gas infrastructure provides sufficient flexibility for the EU member states to ensure security of gas supply.
Well, good.
Cheering words. But the gasmen didn't examine the specter now haunting Europe. What happens, and this was written in January 29th, 2022, so it's last month. What happens if Putin invades Ukraine?
I don't know. Why would you think such a thing? You're crazy.
The West hits Russia with sanctions, and Putin retaliates by shutting down all the pipelines carrying Russian gas to the West.
Yeah, well, we'll do it first.
The conventional wisdom used to be a complete shutdown of piped gas from Russia, which makes up roughly a third of the gas burned in Europe, was unthinkable. Thane Gustafsson, author of Klimat, a thoughtful book on Russian energy, Klimat, observes that even at the height of the Cold War, Soviet Union didn't shut off gas exports, and during Russia's fiercest dispute over gas with Ukraine, only the gas flowing through that country were disrupted, and then only fleetingly. But a shutdown's no longer unthinkable. Gustafsson now says, I don't think it's unlikely at all Putin would actually reach for the gas tap over Ukraine. Unlike his Soviet predecessors, the Russian president can afford the cost of a brief energy shock. Jamie Concha of Energy Intelligence, an industry publisher, has crunched the numbers, not counting any penalties. It's The Economist, after all. I expect you to crunch the numbers. Assuming the average daily price seen in the fourth quarter of 2021, he reckons a complete cutoff of piped gas to Europe would cost Gazprom, that's Gerhard Schroeder's place, the ex-chancellor
used to be, yes, right.
of Germany, who helped set this up in the first place. Between 203 million and 228 million a day in lost revenues. So if such an embargo lasted 3 months, Mr. Putin's leverage fades in spring when gas demand drops to just 60% of that in January. There's two reasons Putin invaded in the winter. The Russian tanks don't do well when they bog down in mud. And also energy prices are highest in winter. So there's two strategic reasons for him to invade now. Lost sales would add up to about 20 billion. And a loss of that size would have been devastating for the rickety Soviet economy, which relied heavily on hard currency earned by selling gas to the West. But Russia today has 600 billion sitting in its central bank reserves and could easily handle such a blow, except one of the moves that Boris Johnson is talking about is cutting off Russia from the international banking supply. which would hurt the oligarchs a lot. And it could even come out ahead financially in the short term. More sable rattling over Ukraine already sent prices soaring for gas and oil. Without a war, J.P. Morgan Chase forecasts the higher prices will lead to Gazprom making over $90 billion in gross operating profit this year, up from $20 billion. So
That's
if Russia does wield the gas weapon, how much would it hurt the West? If the interruption were limited to gas passing through Ukraine, the rest of Europe would manage fine. What if Mr. Putin cuts off all gas to Europe? Some immediate disruption would be inevitable. Slovakia, Austria, and parts of Italy especially. Germany is the most vulnerable because of its climate-motivated push to retire coal-fired power stations and its rash decision taken in the wake of Japan's Fukushima disaster to shut down its nuclear plants. It remains more reliant on natural gas than it need be. It is Europe's largest consumer of gas, which accounts for roughly a quarter of its total energy consumption, with Russia supplying over half of its imports. The good news is that Europe's energy system is more resilient than it was during 2009.
That is good news.
Andreas Goldthau of the University of Erfurt in Potsdam points to some useful changes, pro-competition measures that weaken Gazprom's grip. A dense web of gas interconnections now links previously isolated countries. And another source of cheer is liquefied natural gas, LNG. Heavy investments in regasification plants means Europe has plenty of idle capacity. Citigroup estimates that with historical utilization rates of these plants running at 50% of capacity or less, the region can, in theory, handle enough to replace 2/3 of Russian piped gas imports. So the limiting factor isn't capacity, but supply. It takes a long time to expand new production, so Europe's best hope would be to get hold of existing cargoes originally destined for elsewhere.
Supply chain problems.
Another source of resilience is the amount of gas held in storage. Last year's bitter winter left gas storage levels below 5-year norm. Even so, Rystad, an energy research firm, calculates that a continuation of normal weather this winter would leave enough gas in storage by spring to make up for 2 months of lost Russian gas exports, and that might even cover 4 months of a cutoff, although a cold snap would reduce the buffer.
Okay.
And also, Europe has a secret weapon, a massive but little discussed store of cushion gas. For technical and safety reasons, regulators insist storage units like salt caverns and aquifers maintain huge amount of gas that's not normally available to put on the market, like our oil reserves here in the U.S. So in sum, Europe will suffer if Russia cuts off the gas, but the price will be paid from the wallet rather than physical suffering. It's unpleasant, but a bigger price would be paid by Russia over the longer term. Gazprom would face massive commercial fallout. Already, Germany's saying, we're not doing this. Nord Stream's gone, and we have to stop depending upon Russia. We have to turn to other sources to get our energy. And so the longer-term effects on Putin are going to be quite significant.
Okay.
So,
well,
that's just, again, for our listeners, it paints a picture of there's some pain but not disaster, and that frees the West, Biden and Johnson acting in coordination with the other allies, especially Germany, to actually tighten the belt on Russia and not just say, okay, well, we can't do anything because it's bad for us.
Okay, we can live with that then, I guess. Well, and it's a big opportunity. This is what Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman wanted to do, was ship LNG to Europe and sell, although I think they were also considering docking at Kaliningrad, the Russian outpost there, and using their offloading station to pipe that stuff down into Eastern and Central Europe. So they'll have to find a new way. I assume that would be off limits to them. And also maybe they're in jail. So that might be a problem as well. But that was one of their big schemes. And someone else will step up and send that LNG there instead, whether it's other American entrepreneurs, Ukrainian American entrepreneurs, or Gulf states, too, can bring it in from the other direction. So,
and last item I have for today is Andrew Desiderio. Andrew Desiderio on Ukraine. He's from Politico. On Ukraine, Republicans on and off Capitol Hill are all over the map as Putin tries to redraw his own. Trump has privately signaled a split with Tucker Carlson and Josh Hawley, while most of the Senate and House GOP back harsh sanctions and troop deployments. There's a difference between what politicians think and where voters are, Hawley said. It won't be a friction point with voters because they've made up their minds, but it will be among elected officials for a while. He says expanding NATO is a strategic mistake. Graham tells us wholly are outliers. I think a vast majority of our conferences don't let Putin get away with this. To allow Putin to get away with the destruction of Ukraine and to think it won't affect China is naive. So therefore, of course, Dems in disarray.
Sure, of course, why not?
Right. Let's see. Do you think Ukraine should be allowed to join NATO from an Econ US YouGov America poll? That's Economist.
Okay.
Percent yes, no. Registered voters,
now.
do you think Ukraine should be allowed to join NATO? Yes, 49, no, 16. Biden voters, 59-6. Trump voters, 46-23. Democrats, 56-11. GOP, 46-21. Not that much difference.
Okay.
Indies, 39-18. They vote with Democrats on this. Men, women, liberals, moderates, conservatives, 45-23. Everybody, sort of is on that page. So, the public certainly is behind the Biden approach to Ukraine, not the Bannon approach to Ukraine.
I guess so. I don't know if anybody's approach contemplates admission to NATO right now, but okay. I mean, now it would be kind of dangerous. Just put it that way. It commits you to war, for instance. So I could see where I think people, though, the best conclusion to draw from that is, sentiment is on Ukraine's side, not Russia's. Good, fine. That doesn't necessarily mean I want to have an Article 5 obligation right now.
Right, and it doesn't mean you necessarily let them into NATO right now.
Yes.
But extending the discussion we were having about whether or not Russia really belongs in the UN.
Yes.
What if the soon-to-be Ukrainian government in exile challenges the Ukraine seat in the UN?
Mm-hmm. No, and they ought to. And I don't know. I mean, I guess it won't matter that much unless there's something more in the balance. Like, what does Ukraine's seat in the UN carry with it? Is there a seat on the UN Security Council and a veto? Because
Yeah,
they're the legitimate
but they don't get a
successors?
veto. But are they up for?
Well, why not? Make them Russia.
Well, that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
It's Russia isn't entitled to this. We're the natural.
Yeah. I don't see why not.
People that should belong there. You guys are just a gas station. We're an actual country.
Mm-hmm. Been there longer than you, so. But all right. So for the entirety of the UN, the existence of the UN, of course, it's been different. But that reminds me of what I was telling you during the break, that there was some very interesting trolling of the Russians from the American embassy in Ukraine before hostilities exploded, but only just before. And the idea was, as I learned more, it made more sense as I learned more about the history between the two countries, that what we think of as Russia proper and Russian culture and all the things that are wrapped up in it really began in Kiev, now Kyiv in the Ukrainian language, and sort of migrated eastward from there. But the trolling that was going on was an interesting tweet from the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv, and I guess countering the claims from Putin and Russia that really Ukraine has always actually been a satellite of Russia and Russian culture. In reverse, apparently, the history is the opposite. And so what they did was they tweeted around these pictures of some of the ancient landmarks of Kyiv, including some various churches and cathedrals, some of which I will be unable to pronounce, but which were constructed between 996 AD and 1108 AD, or the Common Era, as we sometimes call it, including, St. Sophia's Cathedral, St. Michael's Monastery, and then some other ones that are harder to pronounce, but comparing them to what was Moscow looking like in 996 and 1108. Just tweeting. So here's 996. Kyiv is the Desyatina Church being built in 996. Moscow, 996. Here's a picture of a forest. Same thing. Same picture of the same forest over and over again. These monumental constructions of a vibrant culture marking out Kiev as the predecessor to Moscow and Russia proper. And that, in fact, the Russians have it backwards. And that's what, I mean, that to me was like, well, maybe that could be expanded into. Maybe we're the legitimate successors to the USSR.
And as an aside, I said to you, I'm not reading the Watergate book just yet because I'm in the middle of the Bright Ages, which is a medieval retelling of exactly that era, making the point that it wasn't the Dark Ages at all. Look what you just described about Ukraine. There's nothing dark about that. It's very bright, very vibrant.
I'm going to show you
it's not like all culture building and everything else stopped. In fact, that's why it should be called the Bright Ages.
Yeah, well, that's a great,
Russia,
interesting argument all by itself. I've sent you that tweet so you can see it. I'll put it in the roundup today, and it's funny, and it's not the only one. I guess they just continued all day long baiting the Russians, and then I'm sure now that bombs are falling, I guess it's not quite as funny anymore. Or maybe part, I assume
maybe it's part of the campaign to get Ukraine to sit in that seat on the UN Security Council.
Could be. Who knows? The Russians may want to turn off that tap quickly, but then remember, it's still bad news to bomb an American embassy anywhere. So, we'll see how crazy the Russians are. Of course, they may say, we thought it was an aspirin factory next door or something like that.
All right, and one more piece, and look at that. It's almost 10 o'clock. And who knew?
Time flies when you're...
This one's in the Washington Post. Time flies when you're in the middle of a war. This is Washington Post, EU, or that's European Union.
Oh, okay.
Not EU.
I was like, EU. Who's that? Is it a...
PU.
Okay.
EU will unveil a strategy to break free from Russian gas. After decades of dependence, Ukraine crisis has pushed Europe towards renewables, but will the change come quickly enough?
Okay.
Right?
I don't know.
But is it the, I forget it.
I forget it.
The rule, Bainbridge rule, Bitterberg rule, something. If you ever see a headline that asks a question, the answer is always no.
Oh, okay.
You don't have to read the piece.
That.
Right? Is the GOP breaking from Trump? Oh, no. Well, it's a question. The answer is no.
If you knew the answer, you would just put it in. If it's a yes, that's just
right. So you got to write your headlines very carefully, because otherwise, it's always no.
The Fox News question mark is how we know it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I know it. I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Reminds me when I was a resident and attending teaching medical students, and we used to play a game called It's Always C, because I like my students to succeed, and so I give them a multiple choice and remind them the answer's always C.
Yeah.
So here's your choice.
Okay.
What do you think this kid has? The answer's always C, not B.
Right.
No, not B.
You got to make B more ridiculous.
Why don't you go to surgery? You're not doing pediatrics.
Okay.
You can't even play It's Always C. So if you see a headline with a question mark, the answer is no.
Makes sense.
The strategy to split from Russian energy, expected to be announced by the European Commission next week, would give Europe a freer political hand against Russia than it has had in the past. It would take years and come with a hefty bill for European taxpayers, but it comes with the crucial backing of Germany, a nation so entangled with Russia that one of its former chancellors, Gerhard Schroeder, is the chairman of Rosneft, Russia's biggest oil company. Well, that guy's name keeps coming up, doesn't it? Well, those of you who listen to the show knew that name because, like, we talked about it yesterday.
Yeah.
With this week's arrival of Russian boots on Ukrainian soil, Germany had enough. Chancellor Olaf Scholz shelved the Nord Stream. He made me say Scholz shelled out loud. The guy who wrote this story, I don't know, has no consideration for my mispronunciation of German names. Anyway, he shelved the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline between Russia and Germany, a new project that was emblematic of Europe's energy-focused approach to Russia. European Commission planned strategy next week aims to accelerate the transition to renewable energy so that Europe never again is so dependent on the Kremlin to keep households warm and factories humming. Note the terminology there. It's not the Russians. It's not the Russian people. It's the Kremlin and Putin. Always have to say that when you write stories about what's going on with war. Russia isn't invading Ukraine. Putin and the Kremlin are invading Ukraine. The Russian army is invading Ukraine. Russian people are not so happy about it. As a matter of fact, there are protests, but they tend to be arrested as soon as they happen.
It's dangerous, sure.
But there's a lot of worried people in Russia because they're getting the idea that, hey, maybe the U.S. wasn't lying about what's going on. Maybe our people were.
Have they tried protesting in trucks? Because they might not get arrested that way.
A strong European Union cannot be so reliant on an energy supplier that threatens to start a war on our continent, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen told the Conference of Security-Focused European Policymakers Saturday. She complained Russia's state-owned gas company Gazprom was delivering the bare minimum of gas this winter, even though price and demand are through the roof. Strange behavior for a company.
Oh, good.
No, it's not. Just see Texas.
Yeah.
Just make the price go as high as possible because that's the best thing for our shareholders.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's good if you're needing
We're
to
not going
wean
to
yourself
invest
off.
in like winterizing the equipment so that you guys don't get your energy turned off. That costs money. We're not doing that.
Yeah.
A top Russian policymaker embraced the role of energy threat maker Tuesday, underlying Russia's view of itself as a spoiler in Europe. Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz has ordered a stop to the certification of Nord Stream, tweeted Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council. I forgot to talk about this tweet. And a former prime minister. Fine. Welcome to a new world where Europeans will very soon be paying 2,000 euros per cubic meter of gas. So, like saying the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, but also the part that people don't really understand. I mean, they'll have a better shot at understanding what that means. But if you're trying to convince Americans, 2,000 euros
that
per
wasn't
cubic
aimed at Americans.
meter.
That was aimed at Europeans.
Yeah, well,
And they know it.
I guess so. They know what a euro is worth anyway. But yeah, I don't know how many people know. So what does that work out
in
to?
France, for example, France is not Germany. In
meters.
France, nuclear energy provides 70% of the country's electricity.
Sacre bleu.
So they're a
all
little
I
bit
have
more
for
insulated
you,
than
French.
Germany is.
Okay, yes, true. Right? So, all right, well, everybody will have to, we'll come to Germany's aid. That we can do.
Right.
And,
So
if it means selling
Macron
them
in
gas,
France
it's
was
gonna be
talking
great.
about building a new fleet of nuclear plants, but also turning to renewable energy and energy efficiency, and was having some blowback about that. And things may change now.
I guess so. That'll change the outlook, just as it did on NATO admission or interest anyway, in other countries that have traditionally resisted it.
Right. Europe doesn't have to completely
things
eliminate its dependence on Russian gas. It just has to neutralize its potency as a point of leverage. That's all.
That is true, too. So what does that mean? It's easy? No.
It takes a lot of work to back out a fuel like gas, and Europe has been well on its way to doing this over the last 5 years. It just needs to do more now. So
there should be
do what you need to do.
trains
You know,
and
like
tiny cars.
make the post office fleet electric instead of gas,
Yeah, if we could.
which
well,
we
if can
didn't
work-
do.
Yeah, we were gonna, and it sounded like a great idea, but maybe now, right now the lobbyists are out there saying, "Hey, you don't want to fund Russia's war in Ukraine, do you?"
Exactly.
Doesn't have anything to do with them. But but the point is, it sounded like it did when I started.
Right.
It's not
Now,
like
this is
with
an article I
natural
set
gas.
aside in a happier time when we weren't at war in Europe from Paul Waldman, no relation
That guy,
to me.
right?
Oh, also no relation to you.
Right.
In
Unless
the
it's
plumb
good.
line, Rick Scott reveals the GOP's election strategy: all culture, war, all the time.
Yes.
Well, war doesn't sound so great today, but back in the
That's true,
day
too.
when it did sound
Good
great
point.
to them, when you're in the opposition and your party lacks a clear leader other than your mad exiled king, there are plenty of opportunities for political entrepreneurship. If you come up with a new way to threaten trans kids or a bold new agenda for Republicans to follow should they take over Congress, you can get a bunch of attention. So Rick Scott, a potential future presidential candidate and chair of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, has released an 11-point blueprint that he hopes all Republicans will rally around. And by the way, that includes raising everybody's taxes.
Yeah. Everybody.
Everybody.
Well, not
Like raising taxes. That's like a Republican thing, right? Everybody knows that.
yes. Not
Is
rich
the
people.
critical race theory panic number one? Of course it is. Our kids will say the Pledge of Allegiance, salute the flag, learn that America is a great country, and choose the school that best fits them, reads the first item.
What kind of mishmash
And because it
is
wouldn't
that?
be GOP policy document without inane ideas to make government less effective, it includes requiring term limits for government employees and suggests cutting IRS funding by 50%.
Yes. You're going to tax everybody, but we're going
Right.
to make it impossible to collect those taxes.
Well, as Paul Waldman points out, because apparently Scott, who's the wealthiest member of Congress with a fortune of $250 million, who was chief executive of a hospital chain that committed the largest Medicare fraud in history to that date, thinks it's too hard for rich people to cheat on their taxes.
Yeah, so got to ease up on them. That guy in the Eat the Rich campaign, I think, sounds delicious. So,
right.
On the menu.
Again, so what happens
What?
if you take that approach? Well, there's some new polling out suggesting that Democrats are actually, doing okay on this stuff. The poll finds that 83% of Americans say books should never be banned for criticizing U.S. history. 85% oppose banning them for airing ideas you disagree with. 87% oppose banning them for discussing race or depicting slavery. 76% say schools should be allowed to teach ideas that might make students uncomfortable.
Oh, dear.
68% say teachings make people more understanding what others went through, and 58% believe racism is still a serious problem today.
Well,
And 66% say public schools teach too little about the history of black Americans or teach the right amount. That's 42 and 24. And 59% say we made a lot of progress since the 60s.
well, that's
So
good.
that hints at a way forward for Democrats. Large majorities think both. We've made a good deal of progress and we need to do more. And that shouldn't be too hard a balance to strike.
Okay. So we're kind of on the side of the popular opinion. We just have to translate that into votes, and you know how great we are at that.
Right. So if you focus too much on the persistence of racial disparities, you're denying the racial progress. And you're saying America is irredeemable, and you're trying to make children hate our country, and that's the rhetoric that the Republicans use. And the polling suggests Americans don't see it that way. So it's perfectly okay to say,
Yeah.
we've done a lot, we need to do more. It's that simple.
Yeah, and it seems like a popular position. So the popularists will be happy, except unless they abandon that because they're really gimmitarians.
So all is not lost.
Okay, well, we'll work on losing it between now and Monday when we speak to you again. So we'll hopefully make it all through the weekend, and good luck to the folks in Ukraine. That's the best I can
Well, it'll
wish
be
you.
yuck at that point because the rain, 2/3 of it have been annexed into Russia.
Welcome back now to the Kagro Morning Show. Kagro Morning Network Radio. Yeah, okay, whatever. Kagro in the Morning Show. All right, I'm distracted. Immediately my thoughts went to, we work so hard to have that what do we use again? Skype hang-up sound not be on the air. And there it was. That doesn't bother me. I don't know why it bothers Greg, but he's a professional, and I am the other thing, whatever the opposite of that is. Anyway, so yes, much going on. Donald Trump ensconced at Pervalago and making anti-American statements all day, and not really sure why we allow that to go on. I think at this point we might as well just say, national security dictates that we're just going to have to shut down the power grid to Pervalago, and it seems to take out his electronic communications, so much the better. It's not a bad idea. We've never had such a mouthy former president before. And then, of course, someone who was actually a Russian tool at that. It's actually quite disturbing. And it would be well worth considering shutting that pipeline down. Okay, let's see. There are about 300 different directions that I wanted to go in, but I'm going to dive into Pocket and try to call forth all of these various bits and pieces that we ought to consider. Oh, yes. One of the things that made the rounds last night, another of the fantastic video catches by Aaron Rupar, I guess in the course of his regular viewing, was watching Fox News late last night. The Laura Ingraham show was on, and the former guy called into the show. And, of course, they put him right through and put him right on the air because you know how they do on Fox, right? They're like, this will be genius. The production value, fantastic. The old man calling in from Florida on the phone. So, not only doing his stupid voice, but I should get some sort of sound effect of make it a phone filter. You know, because it's somehow it's worse hearing his stupid voice over the phone, poor quality version of it. But apparently, the thing that struck me, there's a whole exchange that they have that Aaron documents. Also, one of the funnier parts of the whole thing is that they had Glenn Greenwald booked to discuss the whole situation. So he was going to come on and say something, you know, whatever, pro-Trump and pro-Putin. And he got bumped before he could actually get the interview going because Trump calls in. So Trump calls and bumps Glenn off the air. And that was funny to me. And then at that point, then it's like, you know, lunatic wacko on the phone, and we're just going to let him rant. Apparently, Trump tells Laura Ingraham, according to Aaron's summary of events here, Trump tells Laura Ingraham that Putin didn't invade Ukraine during his administration, quote, for a very good reason, and I'll explain that to you someday. You know, I'll make that up. And so he's got some fantasy in his head about why it didn't happen during his administration, when it was really probably nothing more than he's doing everything that I want, so why disrupt that? And I guess if they finally reached the point, whatever reason, the Russians just said, we can't take it anymore, we just got to invade Ukraine. And I think most people think, and probably right, that Trump would just jump out of the way. But at any rate, that wasn't why I brought this up. They, of course, then spend the rest of the time blaming Biden for this attack somehow. But the part that grabbed my eye is punctuated with an OMG. After Ingraham mentions that Russian forces are reportedly engaged in an amphibious attack, that is to say, from the Black Sea. They were landing in Odessa, apparently. Trump says, "You told me about the amphibious attack by Americans. You shouldn't be saying that. They should do that secretly." At which point, what? Right. And Laura Ingraham has to say, no, that was the Russians. I didn't say Americans were attacking Ukraine amphibiously. Oh, well, you know, that's different. So, at any rate, apparently he's confused enough. The guy was just president like 25 minutes ago, basically. And he's so confused. I mean, granted, things are hard to hear on the phone, etc. But, I mean, you're not sharper than that to be able to figure out, well, she couldn't have said that Americans were attacking Ukraine, because that's probably not going to happen. I mean, that's just not something that, even if I was president, we probably wouldn't be attacking Ukraine at this point. So why he couldn't figure out that, no, that's not what we're talking about, I have no idea. But anyway, the guy belongs in a rubber room. He's an idiot. And again, I'll say, it's my everlasting regret that there isn't the word as powerful and insulting as the one we've rightly excised from our vocabularies. But, you know, this guy is like stupefyingly dumb. It makes me dumber to think about how dumb he is. That's really painful and difficult. Anyway, that was kind of a weird thing. And let's see. You know what? Here's something I wanted to jump to. It was something that Greg mentioned during the segment when he was talking about, I don't know, he made brief reference to Texas and its power grid and heating problems during the last winter, and I guess making comparison to the possibilities for Germany and elsewhere in Europe, dependent as they are on Russian gas. But just to jump back to a Texas thing, because, you know, all right, so you made mention of that. It reminds me of something that we ought to put on the record here if we're allowed. Let's see. Is this going to stand in the way of everything here? I guess so. I have a Houston Chronicle article that I guess I'll have to read through Pocket instead. I was allowed to read it yesterday, but today's another day, so apparently not. Ex-ERCOT chief, you remember that was their, I don't know, that's Texas's weird energy thing. I can't remember what that stands for, and maybe it's described in the article, but I'm going to look it up. And it's the laughably enough, Electric Reliability Council of Texas. And, of course, the big problem with it was that they couldn't keep the electricity on reliably in Texas. But, okay, that's what they called it, and they screwed everything up. But here's the news. Ex-ERCOT chief says He was following Abbott's direction when they ran up billions in bills during the freeze. You remember that people faced these emergency bills where they were being billed thousands and thousands of dollars for a single day's electricity or gas supply or whatever else, right? James Osborne, writing for the Houston Chronicle, has this news. The former head of the Texas Power Grid testified in court Wednesday that when he, I don't know what's more surprising there, the fact that he testified in court or that it was Wednesday. I gave equal emphasis to both. What did he testify? That's the big part. That when he ordered power prices to stay at the maximum price cap for days on end during last year's frigid winter storm and blackout, and I'm sure everybody thought, that guy sucks. We should, I'm sure they thought, we should kill that guy. And as a result, they ran up billions of dollars in bills for power companies that ended up getting passed on to the consumers. He was following the direction of Governor Greg Abbott, who also was in the news because he's a jackass, and yesterday issued his letter. I just want to make sure we mention on air. Everyone talked about this, and Greg made mention of it, issued a directive in the form of a letter. Apparently directing state agencies and teachers and schools all to participate in a program of identifying and then investigating, whatever that means, the transgender students in schools and elsewhere, and that it was everybody's duty to sniff them out, investigate them, and report them, because parents indulging their kids' transitions were committing, in his view, child abuse. And, of course, that would trigger all sorts of things, actions by the state to, I guess, remove kids from their homes. But the idea of also launching an investigation and making it the school's responsibility for incredibly violative of all sorts of privacy rights, of course, but also just putting millions of people in a terrible position, and of course ripe for all sorts of exploitation and wrongdoing. Like I can't stand the neighbor kid anymore. Why don't I just tell the authorities he's transgender and cause problems? Like, because it will swat our neighbors, and the Children and Family Services Division will come and pester them and follow them around and put them on probation, or even remove the kid from the home, which is great because I think the kid tipped over my garbage cans. And it's like, what evidence do you have that we have any jurisdiction here? Even if you accept the idea that we're supposed to be patrolling for transgender kids. I don't know. I thought he was transgender, but he looks, looks quite like it doesn't matter what he looks like, right? That you have no reason to believe that the neighbor boy next door is transgender, but you say, oh, okay, well, but I thought he used to be a girl. Dumb people will buy into that, and you're going to be able to cause all sorts of problems for your neighbors. Not to mention the actual legitimate cases where people they're just trying to live their life, and now we're going to be investigating them. And what does that mean in Texas, to investigate transgenderism? Does that mean an official squad of Texas state underwear peekers who get to look inside your kid's clothing to determine what gender they think the kid ought to be? I have no idea. I don't know. Who knows where they're going with this, but they're clearly not prepared to lay out an actual policy. It's just going to scare everybody and make everybody miserable instead. That's Texas for you. But I originally got here to tell you about the damage he was doing on energy, which is a lot less confusing and less rife with, metaphysical questions. Instead, we have the testimony from court yesterday of Bill Magnus, the former CEO of the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, who said that even as power plants were starting to come back online, former Public Utility Commission Chairman Deanne Walker had told him that Abbott wanted them to do whatever was necessary to prevent further rotating blackouts that left millions of Texans without power. I'm sure he wanted that, but guess what he got? She told me the governor had conveyed to her if we emerged from rotating outages, it was imperative that they not resume. Magnus testified. We needed to do what we needed to do to make it happen. So instead they made energy too expensive to afford and people just stopped using it, and then we wouldn't have those rotating blackouts, I guess. Abbott's office did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Last year, the governor's spokesman, Mark Miner, maybe M-I-N-E-R, unless he says meaner for whatever reason, said the governor was not involved in any way in the decision to keep prices at the maximum of $9,000 per megawatt hour, more than 150 times normal prices. Like, I don't know how much a megawatt hour should normally cost. No more than I know how many euros a cubic meter of natural gas should cost. But now we know. It's 150 times more. He described the decision to send an aide to ERCOT's operations center in the middle of the crisis as based on the feeling the grid operator was spewing, quote, disinformation. Magnus's decision to keep power prices at the maximum cap for more than 24 hours after conditions on the power grid began to improve is now at the center of a bankruptcy trial waged by the Waco-based electric co-op Brazos Electric. Brazos contends that decision was made recklessly, adding up to a $1.9 billion power bill from ERCOT that forced them into bankruptcy. It did nothing at all to cause more generation to come online, said Lino Mendiola, one of the attorneys representing Brazos. It was an attempted remedy that didn't solve any of the problems caused by the winter storm, but not much of a remedy. Good attempt, bad remedy. The original order to raise power prices to the cap was made by the Public Utility Commission on February 15th to try to get power plants back online and encourage large power users like factories and petrochemical plants to stay offline. ERCOT elected to keep prices at the cap, and can you even believe that is you would have thought, based on the reaction of how high those prices went, there's a cap? Really? And the cap is 150 times normal. That's not much of a cap. But okay, they elected to keep prices at the cap until February 19th, a decision that the Texas Independent Market Monitor criticized in a report last year as having, quote, exceeded the mandate of the commission. It's getting a little technical, but you see what's at the heart of this here is that the governor seems to have ordered this to happen, and people who are, or I guess companies anyway, who are bankrupt as a result would like to know whether there was a real reason for doing that or whether the governor was just screwing with them. This decision resulted in $16 billion in additional costs to ERCOT's market, wrote Carrie Bivens, director of ERCOT's Independent Market Monitor. Magnus, who was fired last year, has long defended his and other ERCOT officials' actions as necessary to keep the grid from slipping into a total blackout that could take weeks or months to recover from. But in testimony in federal bankruptcy court in Houston on Tuesday and Wednesday, he explained in detail how Walker had come to ERCOT's operations center in the middle of the crisis and relayed to him Abbott's demand that rotating blackouts come to an end. Magnus said he agreed that was still a risk, explaining even as power plants were starting to come back online on February 17th, the system was far from secure. Some power plants were still coming offline because of cold or gas supply issues, and there was concern if power prices were allowed to return to the normal market conditions, large power users might start coming back online using crucial power reserves. We were still seeing 40,000 megawatts of outages, whatever that means. And at the peak, we had 52,000 megawatts, but 40,000 is still a lot, Magnus said. We saw the potential for a load shed coming again. And he described how after so many hours of power outages, there was a risk that Texas's problems could cascade, explaining how water plants that had been relying on backup generation would soon have run out of fuel if rotating blackouts resumed. All right, well, that sounds like a major disaster in the offering. And I don't know what else, he said. So the judge overseeing the trial, U.S. bankruptcy judge David Jones, that's a real name, responded, You're looking into the unknown. I don't think anyone would say you're not trying to do the right thing, he said. Okay, well, we'll see about that. But it's interesting. I guess it's not the worst thing. I mean, I guess you have to make some sort of decision. And surely, I guess everyone could understand the governor's interest in making sure that there weren't continuing rotating blackouts or whatever they were calling it. But I guess if your energy bill, if you participated in that weird program where you could buy your own energy on the open energy market, and you're looking at several $100,000 worth of home heating bills, you can thank intervention by the governor. But I guess the argument here is, well, it was a bad thing and it cost people a lot of money, but the alternative was we might have ruined everything for a lot longer if we had just let people buy as much energy as they wanted for lower prices. That sounds like a bad thing if water treatment plants run out of energy. You don't want that, I guess. All right, very interesting. Just sort of a tangent. I just didn't want to spend the whole day on Ukraine because, we just don't know that much about what's going on there, and we'll have to wait for further developments in order to figure things out. Okay, let's see. Other news I have to share with you. This too, I guess, we're getting distracted from this by Ukraine, but we'll do our best to not let you miss all of the news. Yesterday, some weird news out of New York, and the New York Times would be the local paper for that, so we can let them, we can feel guilt-free about using them as local coverage. 2 prosecutors leading New York's Trump inquiry resign, clouding the case's future. Oh no. It seems like we won't have the criminal prosecution by the Manhattan DA after all. The resignations came after the Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg was said to have expressed doubts about the case. Gosh, I hope there's a good explanation for this, because it feels like it's a bad explanation instead. Who's writing here? William K. Rashbaum, Ben Protis, Jonah Bromwich, I'm going to skip the middle initials, Kate Christobeck, and Nate Schweber. Okay, I think we got you all in there. The 2 prosecutors and 5 writers about it. So 2.5 reporters per prosecutor in this. The 2 prosecutors leading the Manhattan District Attorney's investigation into former President Donald J. Trump and his business practices abruptly resigned on Wednesday amid a month-long pause in their presentation of evidence to a grand jury, according to people with knowledge of the matter. And those are the people you're going to make things according to. The unexpected development came not long after the high-stakes inquiry appeared to be gaining momentum and now throws its future into serious doubt. The prosecutors, Carrie Dunn and Mark Pomerantz, submitted their resignations because the new Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, indicated to them that he had doubts about moving forward with a case against Mr. Trump, the people said. Mr. Pomerantz confirmed in a brief interview that he had resigned, but declined to elaborate. Mr. Dunn declined to comment. Without Mr. Bragg's commitment to move forward, the prosecutors late last month postponed a plan to question at least one witness before the grand jury, one of the people said. They have not questioned any witnesses in front of the grand jury for more than a month, essentially pausing their investigation into whether Trump inflated the value of his assets to obtain favorable loan terms from banks. The precise reasons for Bragg's pullback are unknown. Like maybe somebody he knows almost fell out a window or something. We can't say for sure. And he has made few public statements about the status of the inquiry since taking office, but the prosecutors had encountered a number of challenges in pursuing Trump. Notably, they had thus far been unable to persuade any Trump Organization executives to cooperate and turn on Mr. Trump. And I guess that's gonna hurt your efforts. But you could keep pressing or use some tools to see if you can change people's minds. In a statement responding to the resignations of the prosecutors, the spokeswoman for Bragg said that he was grateful for their service and that the investigation was ongoing. Time, though, is running out for this grand jury, whose term is scheduled to expire in April. Prosecutors can ask jurors to vote to extend their term, but generally avoid doing so. They also are often reluctant to impanel a new grand jury after an earlier one has heard testimony, because witnesses could make conflicting statements if asked to testify again. And without Dunn, a high-ranking veteran of the office who has been closely involved with the inquiry for years, and Pomerantz, a leading figure in New York legal circles who was enlisted to work on it, the years-long investigation could peter out. The resignations mark a reversal after the investigation had recently intensified. Cy Vance Jr., Bragg's predecessor, convened the grand jury last fall, and prosecutors began questioning witnesses before his term concluded at the end of the year. Vance, of course, did not seek re-election. In mid-January, reporters for the New York Times observed significant activity related to the investigation at the Lower Manhattan courthouse, where the grand jury meets, with at least 2 witnesses visiting the building and staying inside for hours. The witnesses were Trump's longtime accountant and an expert in the real estate industry, according to 2 people familiar with the appearances, which have not been previously reported. Mr. Dunn and Mr. Pomerantz also made regular appearances at the courthouse. The burst of activity offered a sign that Bragg was forging ahead with the grand jury phase of the investigation, a final step before seeking charges. But in recent weeks, that activity has ceased, and Dunn and Pomerantz have been seen only rarely. The pause coincides with an escalation in the activity of a parallel civil inquiry by the New York State Attorney General, Letitia James, whose office is examining some of the same conduct by Trump and is also participating in the criminal inquiry. In a statement, a spokeswoman for Ms. James's office said of the criminal inquiry, the investigation is ongoing and there's a robust team working on it. Ms. James, who last week received approval from a judge to question Trump and his two of his adult children under oath, has filed court documents describing a number of ways in which the Trump Organization appeared to have misrepresented the value of its properties. She concluded that the company had engaged in fraudulent or misleading practices, and although she lacks the authority to criminally charge Trump, she could sue him. Bragg's office must meet a higher bar to bring a criminal case, and for his part, Trump has disputed the notion that he inflated his property values or defrauded his lenders, and has accused Bragg and James, both Democrats who are also both black, of being politically motivated and, quote, racists. I've been representing Donald Trump for over a year in this case, and I haven't found any evidence that could lead to a prosecution against him or any crimes, said a lawyer for Mr. Trump, Ronald P. Fischetti. I hope Mr. Bragg will now look again at all the evidence in the case and make a statement that he is discontinuing all investigation of Donald Trump. Well, that's what you would hope for. Not me, but you. Not me, of course, but you. As Mr. Bragg's grand jury presentation has come to a halt, another serious criminal inquiry into the former president has been gaining steam. In recent weeks, a judge has approved the convening of a grand jury for an investigation into Trump's attempts to overturn the results of the 2020 election in Georgia. Another criminal investigation in New York's Westchester County is examining Trump's financial dealings at one of his company's golf courses. The Manhattan investigation, which proceeded in fits and starts for years, was the most developed of the 3 criminal inquiries into Trump. It resulted in indictments last summer of the Trump Organization and its long-serving chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg, on separate tax-related charges. After announcing those charges, the prosecutors zeroed in on a subject that has spurred much debate over the years, Trump's net worth. They have questioned whether Trump defrauded his lenders, sophisticated financial institutions like Deutsche Bank, by routinely inflating the value of his assets, the Times has previously reported. In particular, prosecutors have focused on annual financial statements Trump provided to the lenders, scrutinizing whether he overvalued his various hotels, golf clubs, and other properties to score the best possible loan terms. And of course, we learned the other day that Mazars, his accountants, compiled the statements based on information provided by the Trump Organization, leading the prosecutors to question whether the company had given its accountants bogus data. And earlier this month, Mazars notified the Trump Organization that it would no longer serve as its accountant and that it could no longer stand behind a decade of Trump's financial statements. Mazars said it has not, as a whole, found material discrepancies between the information the Trump Organization provided and the true value of Mr. Trump's assets, but given what it called the totality of circumstances, including its internal investigation and Ms. James's court papers. Mazars, of course, instructed the company to notify anyone who had received these statements that they, quote, should not be relied upon. Now, you would think that that would result in some criminal investigations going forward, but apparently not the case. Even with the retraction from Mazars, the criminal case would likely be difficult to prove. The documents known as statements of financial condition contain a number of disclaimers, including acknowledgments that Trump's accountants had neither audited nor authenticated his claims, and the prosecutors would have to show that Trump's penchant for hyperbole crossed the line into criminality, a tall order when it comes to something as subjective as property values. A case like this might hinge on the testimony of a Trump insider, but they haven't persuaded Weisselberg to cooperate with the investigation, so they might be out of luck. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. We got one more segment left. I feel like we should make our slog through this New York Times thing just to see if there's any more information about, well, why would they make this decision? I understand if they can't get Weisselberg to cooperate, that's something. But isn't there, any more evidence out there that could be dug up or leveraged to make him change his mind? I don't know. But as they said, a case like this one might hinge on the testimony of an insider, and prosecutors haven't persuaded Weisselberg to cooperate, depriving them of the type of insider witness whose testimony can be crucial to complicated white-collar criminal trials. Another challenge is that Trump's lenders might not appear to be, to a jury, to be sympathetic victims, right? You bring the Deutsche Bank guys in there, we didn't know, we got taken for a ride. Yeah, well, maybe not, or maybe who cares? The lenders, which made millions of dollars in interest from Mr. Trump, conducted their own assessments of his assets. Still, the prosecutors had been moving forward. In the fall, Vance convened what is known as a special grand jury, a panel of 23 Manhattan residents chosen at random to hear complex cases like the one involving Trump. Over the course of months, the jurors were expected to meet to hear testimony from witnesses and examine other evidence put forward by the prosecutors. Special grand juries last 6 months, and at the end of these presentations, prosecutors typically direct the jurors to vote on whether or not there is reasonable cause to believe that the person could be guilty. While it is not a foregone conclusion that a grand jury will indict the target of an investigation, such panels routinely vote to bring the charges that prosecutors seek, sometimes less than elegantly put as grand juries would indict a ham sandwich if the prosecutors ask them to. But special grand juries, of course, would have to indict special ham sandwiches. I don't know whether that makes any difference. Late last year, the grand jury heard testimony from Trump's accountant at Mazars about Trump's annual financial statements, the Times previously reported, and soon after, the prosecutors questioned 2 editors for Forbes magazine, which had estimated Trump's net worth over the years for its billionaires list. The accountant testified again last month. People with knowledge of the appearance said. A day later, the prosecutors questioned a real estate expert who specializes in property valuation, according to people with knowledge of that appearance. The witness works for the consulting firm FTI, which I hope is F Trump International, but it probably isn't, but I don't know what it is. which the district attorney's office hired in 2020 to help analyze Trump's financial documents. In the days after this testimony, the prosecutors lined up at least one other witness to appear before the grand jury, but late last month, they postponed the testimony, according to one of the people with knowledge of the matter. If Mr. Bragg ultimately closes the investigation, he could face political fallout in Manhattan, where Trump is generally loathed. Hometown, but whatever. And the district attorney has already had a rocky start to his tenure after a memo he released outlining policies for the office was met with furious pushback from local officials, small businesses, and the public. I don't know what that's about, but it's linked in here if you want to check it out. Bragg, who was sworn in on January 1st, is a former federal prosecutor and veteran of the New York State Attorney General's office, where he oversaw civil litigation against Trump and his administration under Ms. James's predecessor. He cited those cases often while running for district attorney, in part to indicate his experience with high-profile litigation, saying that he had sued Trump more than 100 times. Well, that everybody can say that. The district attorney's criminal investigation into Trump began in the summer of 2018 under Mr. Vance, who initially looked into the Trump Organization's role in paying hush money to a pornographic actress who said she had had an affair with Trump. We all know about that one. The inquiry grew out of a federal case against Trump's former fixer, Michael Cohen, who pleaded guilty to arranging the hush money and said he did so at the direction of Mr. Trump. The focus of the investigation shifted after Vance in 2019 subpoenaed Mazars for copies of Trump's tax returns. Trump sued to block the subpoena, sparking a bitter 18-month legal battle that saw the former president take the case to the United States Supreme Court, where he lost twice. Mr. Dunn, who served as Vance's general counsel and stayed on to help Bragg with the Trump investigation, argued the case before the Supreme Court. And around the time that the prosecutors received Trump's tax documents, Vance recruited Pomerantz, a prominent former prosecutor and defense lawyer, to help lead the investigation. The prosecutors turned their attention to Weisselberg, pressuring him to cooperate, but he refused, and in July they announced an indictment against him and the Trump Organization. The indictment accused Weisselberg and the company of a 15-year scheme to pay for luxury perks for certain executives, like free apartments and leased Mercedes-Benzes, off the books. Weisselberg pleaded not guilty, and his lawyers filed court papers this week seeking to dismiss the charges. A judge has tentatively scheduled a trial for late summer. That's it. I don't know. It leaves a lot of mystery still surrounding the decision, and nobody can feel too good about that when there's so much money and, I don't know, Russian mobster murder, let's say, floating around these days. You can never tell. All right, let's see. Switching back to Russia, Ukraine, and what the U.S. might want to do about it, I saw an interesting thread here shared by our friend Bobble Speak, who was interested in some of the terminology being used and throws out the weird phrase of atom jurisdiction. You'll see what that's about when we read this thread. How brief is it? Okay, not all that long, actually. But this thread, it starts a little earlier. A thread from, who is this guy? Halhod, Halhod. Just Hal, but is H-O-D his last name? Halhod, or is it short for something, or initials? Anyway, not really sure who we're talking about here, but it's a blue checkmark kind of a fellow. The Twitter profile says expertise, I guess, in genomics, automation, semiconductors, and pandemics. How about that? Everybody's a pandemic expert these days. Hal starts way back here, although the pointer tweet from Bobblespeak is down about 3/4 of the way down. But let me read through this whole thread, because I found it interesting yesterday. I think I read through all of them. Waiting with bated breath, he says, like the nerd I am, to see whether the U.S. deploys its, quote, whole Russia foreign debt product rule. Now, whole Russia is hyphenated. Whole Russia, like all of Russia. Foreign direct product rule. I'm not familiar offhand with what it is, but he begins to explain here. In response to the breakaway recognition. That's, probably not a great terminology for it because they're not really breakaway, but okay. I don't blame them for that. Russia apparently well prepped for economic sanctions, but I think FDPR, Foreign Direct Product Rule, FDPR will be very different, potentially huge impact. And maybe I should grab this Foreign Direct Product Rule thing and open up a separate window with a search for some information about what that might be. Just sort of, anyway, I guess this is, here's a briefer explanation that comes up at the top of the Google search. The FDPR enables regulation of a broader range of items, specifically items produced outside the United States that are, 1, the direct product of national security controlled U.S. regulated technology and software, or 2, are produced from plants or major components of plants that are the direct product of U.S. regulated technology and software, I guess. So what are we reading here? From the AtlanticCouncil.org. Foreign Direct Product Rule. Is Russia the next Huawei? And now it's a question mark, and the answer to that apparently is always no. So I guess that's a little bit of a downer for this thread. But I guess basically it allows for broader sanctions against Russia and withholding a wider range of American-made or American-directed products from the stream of trade with Russia. So, okay. Hal says he's waiting with bated breath like the nerd that he is to see whether the U.S. deploys its whole Russia foreign direct product rule in response to this situation. And he thinks the Russians are ready for sanctions and ready to absorb the costs of sanctions, but something broader like FDPR could be very different. He goes on to explain, the reason I know about this is that I've been following what America's use of foreign direct product rule has done to Huawei, the Chinese electronics producer who was, as I recall, suspected of, embedding spyware product in their products and selling them across the United States as good, cheap electronic goods, phones and video systems and surveillance systems, etc., and piping all the data back to Beijing. Very worrisome, and they had some sanctions imposed upon them, and it has damaged them terribly. So Hal suggests that perhaps the same thing could be done here. So, as he says, the reason I know about it is he's been following America's use of this FDPR against Huawei over the past few years. It's possible to say a few things about what applying the FDPR to Russia as a whole is likely to do. First of all, and to my mind most importantly, all smartphones which use iOS or Android as an operating system in Russia would immediately become less functional. This does sound like an avenue of leverage here. The app stores and underlying protocols will stop working because Google and Apple will have to stop sending updates to Russian devices under something this broad, FDPR. Without updates, phones will slowly stop working. Even Russian apps won't be able to send updates through the American app stores. Exactly what happens depends on how the rule is drawn up, but if Russia is treated as Huawei was treated, this is what will happen. But it goes much further than this. Phone networks and data centers will be cut off from American software and hardware. They will also, if the Huawei model is followed, be cut off from tech products which are produced using American technology. Wow. So even if it's produced elsewhere in another country, but is produced using American technology, how broad is this? That's where we get down to this weird terminology of atoms. This means no chips made with American tools. That's most of them that are in circulation. No components of electric or telephone networks made with American tools. There is no bound on how broadly America can write its FDPR. It can claim jurisdiction over any atoms that touch U.S. tools anywhere in the world. I don't even know exactly what we're talking about here anymore, but that grabbed Bobblespeak's attention. Atom jurisdiction. Wow. That's a pretty powerful weapon if you can make that work. Most of the discussion I see is around economic sanctions, how Russia is prepared and how they won't do much. But undermining a whole country's supply chains like this has never been done before. It has effectively destroyed Huawei. I think it caused serious pain, or could cause serious pain, to the Russians as well. How interesting is that? And then a couple of invitations from media folks. Would you like to tell us here at BBC Radio what this means and how it would work? Please DM me if so. Well, if they did, I'd like to know if there's a report that we can listen to. Seems awfully interesting. And somebody else suggests kicking the Russians off of the International Space Station. Next ship home for you, and no return until Russians leave Ukraine. But, of course, Russians will never leave Ukraine because Russians were in Ukraine before they even invaded. But okay. So there, I guess, are broader and more painful types of sanctions that could be placed on Russia or some Russians, perhaps. But they could really do some damage, and we'll see whether or not they are given any consideration by the U.S. government. Okay, by the way, I wanted to update you on the massive U.S. copycat truck protest copying the enormously annoying Canadian truck protest, which is now over, though Ronnie Jackson continues to insist that we need to invade Canada to deal with this properly. But I mentioned to you yesterday that there was a report from Kevin Lewis of the Washington area Channel 7 ABC News, and that he had reported that he had just gotten off the phone with Bob Bolus, who was allegedly the organizer, the quote-unquote organizer of the American truck protest, and that he had told him, and we laughed at this, that there were currently 10 to 20 trucks staging at the convoy starting point in Scranton, Pennsylvania, but that Bolus was at that point questioning whether or not to even go forward with the thing, because I don't know if I have enough trucks to actually make this thing effective. And that sounded kind of funny, but it did sound like, well, there's still a possibility that he may come and gather more momentum. Well, it turns out that more reporting was necessary, and our Twitter pal NYC Southpaw put side-by-side screen grabs to illustrate the point of reporting by phone versus reporting on the scene. Like I said, Kevin Lewis calls up Bob Bolus and says, how's it going there in Scranton? And Bob says, well, we got 10 to 20 trucks, and we might get enough to go forward with our huge copycat truck protest. Well, Julio Cesar Chavez was reporting on the situation as well, although I don't think I know who Julio Cesar is, but maybe we can quick look him up and see. I'm kind of curious where he's working for. Let's see. There he is. Reuters TV. Okay. Producer out of D.C. So that's what put him on the spot here and what drove him to become interested in covering this thing from close up. And Julio Cesar has a very different view of things. D.C. trucker convoy update from Scranton, PA, i.e. I am here on the ground looking at what's going on. There is currently only one truck in the convoy. And by the way, I'll coin a new phrase here, one truck does not a convoy make. You've got to have at least two trucks to make a convoy, I would think. But he had other vehicles. So that's good. He had a little Yugo that was following. Does anyone remember the Yugo? Okay. Well, anyway, there is only one truck in the convoy, he reports. Organizer Bob Bolus said who's they? This is just one guy. They expected more people to join and will call off the convoy if others don't show up. The convoy was scheduled to leave an hour and 45 minutes ago. He was reporting this yesterday during the show at 9:46. It was already clear that this guy was full of it. They were scheduled to leave an hour and 45 minutes ago, and I guess they didn't go anywhere because it was one dude and some cars. And let's see what he has in his feed this morning. Here's that tweet which we just read. There's a little video going along with it. And if I recall correctly, this was the guy I saw all day long. He spent tweeting the news about this fizzled convoy, and it was hilarious. So here's his next tweet here. Bob Bolus is currently driving his truck in a small parade around downtown Scranton. So choking the economy of the United States as predicted. And he's just following him there. And I mean, his updates were all like, update, we stopped for lunch at McDonald's. Yeah, not much going on with our convoy. Bob Bolus is on the highway headed now down to D.C. We have driven up and down the line. His 18-wheeler is the only one in the convoy, followed by 4 or 5 pickup trucks and SUVs, as far as we can tell. Anyway, it's not always clear who's in his convoy and who isn't. All the other 18-wheelers are passing him, but remember, his 18-wheeler is, covered in flags and Trump propaganda, but also a large picture of Bob Bolus himself, by the way, on the back of the truck I could see. And the other trucks, the actual truckers who are working, have no idea. Anyway, his claim of having 25 trucks driving down is false. I just watched one of the Bob Bolus's own work trucks pass him on the highway and continue driving. So he took off and went somewhere. I fell back right now to count everyone in the convoy. As of 11 a.m. yesterday, assuming everyone driving close together and on the right-hand lane is part of the convoy, there are one 18-wheeler, 2 pickup trucks, and 7 sedans/SUVs. So not so much a trucker convoy as suburban maybe convoy. I don't know. Organizers just told me, he says yesterday, that the plan is to drive down to Harrisburg and then keep going to D.C. Current vehicle lineup, 8 vehicles, 1 18-wheeler driven by Bob Bolus, 5 pickup trucks, 1 SUV, and 1 sedan. Then a trucker update. Bob Bolus has stopped for gas and breakfast outside of Harrisburg. I asked him what he thinks of the lack of truckers joining, and the quote here, "We got a few cars. We've got people who see what we're doing on social media and everyone else. It's like having 10,000 people anyway." It's a lot like it. How many you got out of that 10,000? 1. What else? I was with Betsy, one of the organizers, when she said on the phone to another reporter, I wonder if it was to Kevin, that there were, Kevin had a different number. So another reporter on the phone, there are 30 trucks/vehicles in the convoy. This is false. The convoy has never broken above 15 vehicles. They've lost some during the pit stop. Now looks like 1 18-wheeler, 1 SUV, 4 pickup trucks. And then another update. He's back on the highway. Bob Bolus just left the truck stop north of Harrisburg. He leads the caravan of 8 vehicles total. His 18-wheeler, 4 pickup trucks, 1 SUV, 2 sedans. Bolus plans to drive to D.C., but says he won't disrupt traffic. And that's nice of him. Of course, he can't. Meanwhile, that's it for me. I'm heading straight home from here. More updates for this and other planned trucker convoys from everyone at Reuters' team as things develop, but things have to develop first in order to get there. By the way, somebody else observing the whole thing, taking a look at the decorations that Bob has placed on his 18-wheeler's trailer, has misspelled tyranny at least twice. So it's a tough word, and, they're anti-dictionary over there. So they're not doing so great. So I guess we don't have to worry very much about disrupting traffic, and Republicans don't have to be worried about being blamed for bad traffic in the Northern Virginia area after all. Although I blame them for the routine bad traffic. All right. Man, there's a bunch going on here today. Let's see. Why don't we try this one? I thought this was of some interest. New York Magazine piece. Do I think, first of all, I'm going to be able to read it? Yeah, guess not. I, again, could read it yesterday, but not today. But it looked kind of interesting. And, since we're low on time, we'll try this one too. Sarah Jones, writing a piece called household tyrants about, I guess from the illustration, the photo illustrating the thing, about the angry and annoying parents who show up to school board meetings and shout everybody down, including the poor girl from the Loudoun County High School meetings that we read about just the other day. But basically, the thing that we never found a better name for than calling them Karens, I guess, but we got to stop doing that. This seemed like an interesting piece, and maybe we'll even be able to squeeze it in before the end of the show today. To empower parents, it begins, Florida Republicans would put children in danger. That sounds like bad news, right? How so? If passed, their parental rights in education legislation, more commonly known as the Don't Say Gay bills, would prevent public school districts from, quote, encouraging classroom discussion about sexual orientation or gender identity, CBS News reports. And throw in there the new Texas thing, too, while we're considering this. A proposed amendment would have required educators to report a child's disclosure about their gender identity or sexual orientation to parents within 6 weeks. We heard about that, and now we see Texas's version of it. Don't wait for them to disclose. Go investigate. Look in their underpants and see what you think. Republicans haven't been shy about their rationale. The text of the bills say they allegedly, quote, reinforce the fundamental right of parents to make decisions regarding the upbringing and control of their children. Last year, Senator Josh Hawley introduced a federal Parents' Bill of Rights, which would include the right to review curricula, which they already have, and to visit children during school hours. Okay, let them go to school, but whatever. In Texas, Governor Greg Abbott announced his own parental Bill of Rights last month. Parents will be restored to their rightful place as the preeminent decision maker for their children, he said at a campaign event held fittingly at a charter school. On Wednesday, Abbott told Texas state agencies to investigate reports of gender-affirming care. Ooh, look out, for transgender children. Parents don't lack rights in the U.S. They already enjoy the wide freedom to educate their children as they wish, including at home or in private schools. They can raise their children to be Christians or witches or both. The state does not interfere. Liberals are generally satisfied with this state of affairs. There is no appetite to prohibit parents from raising their children in even the most hate-filled churches. Yet the right, who I always say will never take yes for an answer, behaves as if parental rights were under sustained and serious attack, as if the parent had been dislodged from a high place and, as Abbott said, should be restored. Grievance politics, though, insists that you say that the white males are the most persecuted in America and we need to restore them to their rightful position. And this is just transferring that into parents to include more voters. The GOP's position on parental rights isn't entirely coherent. Any attempt to ban gender-confirming therapy for transgender children theoretically infringes on the right of the parent, right? Listen to parents, but not the ones who have transgender children. Don't listen to them. But this hasn't dissuaded the party from its attacks on trans rights. In Texas, Attorney General Ken Paxton had previously issued an opinion defining gender-affirming care as child abuse. Trans children and their families must now fear the long arm of the state, which will reach into their most private and personal affairs. The right's real ambition isn't restoration, though, but expansion. They want to create new rights on top of the privileges parents already enjoy. In the party's view, parental rights both supersede and exist in conflict with the rights of the child. The right insists that what's good for parents is good for kids. And this is not necessarily the truth, as any queer person can say in return. The idea that children are already people with thoughts and needs independent of their parents never factors into the party's position at all. The parental rights movement isn't new. As journalist Catherine Joyce has observed, the concept is associated historically with some Christian homeschool activists who lobbied for a constitutional amendment that would enshrine the right of a parent to teach their children at home. The language might sound familiar. The liberty of parents to direct the upbringing, education, and care of their children is a fundamental right, it states. But why parental rights? And why now? That's the interesting question. Partially answered here. The right's war on so-called critical race theory and its push to shed COVID-19 caution and reopen schools without masks created an opening that Republicans are eager to exploit. Ever eager to privatize education, the GOP perceives an opportunity. Public schools must conform to the party's ideological strictures or else. Parents can avail themselves of charter schools or use vouchers to attend private schools or homeschool, and yet conservatives are capable of strategic innovation. The GOP has updated its playbook as Republican legislators provoke voters to rage over the prospect of the 1619 Project in curricula, or examples of multicultural education in schools. In a particularly extreme example, the 11-point plan just released by Senator Rick Scott calls for the closure of the Department of Education, along with the introduction of school choice, we've heard that for a million years, which typically means charter schools and vouchers for parents. Whatever the fate of Scott's document, it is an artifact of its time and place. As the conservative fringe gathers the party into itself, movements like parental rights move from obscurity and into the mainstream. The GOP is turning to parental rights as it tilts headfirst to the far right. The two trends are linked. As Republicans long for a strong figure in power, they imagine the same figure in every home. Subject of a household tyrant, the child has no freedom. They had little enough at all. Their right to an education, to be independent thought and action has historically been secondary to their parents' preferences. In the GOP, with the Christian right behind it, that would restrict them even further, even if it places them in danger of, yet more, neglect and abuse. To the GOP, the parent exists to enforce the party's will, as though the parent is simply the local arm of a national entity. Parents who fail to obey may find their powers restricted by the state. Something to think about.
From
a bit more here.
networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David
We'll
Waldman.
finish up with apologies to justice. Authoritarianism is inconsistent in this way. Rights granted to followers are not extended to dissenters. I think we've all known that. And I can't even get through the big wind-up on this, but an interesting piece and something to think about when you're trying to consider the inconsistencies here. But for more, stay tuned, because justice is next.